I'm a veteran and I'd like to record some experiences of mine and a couple of my older brothers as we were all three in the Army. I was the youngest of the three, and I was not quite old enough to get in during World War II, but a year afterwards, I joined the Army in 1946, took basic training in Fort Lee, Virginia, and after basic training was assigned to the finance department. And after a couple of weeks of leave at home, I took a train across this whole country until I got to San Francisco and ultimately got on a boat and took a boat ride to Japan.
And who are you?
And my name is Tom Frankart. Got to Japan in late 1946. And I was there for about a year, working in the 8th Army Fiscal Office. I was secretary to a lieutenant colonel. So it wasn't too bad a duty. While we were over there, we could check out a Jeep on a weekend and go someplace. So some of us, every once in a while, would check out a Jeep and go down to Tokyo for the weekend or something like that. One time when I was in Tokyo, we were walking along a sidewalk, and we came across someone coming out of one of the big office buildings there, and lo and behold, it was General Douglas MacArthur coming out of his headquarters at the Daiichi building. So that was an interesting thing to see. That was one of the two high points of my career. The other high point was the day, about a year later, that they said, "You're going home." So I got on a boat for the second time and went from Yokohama then back to Seattle for discharge. So that was my moderately uneventful time for me, but I wanted also to mention I had two older brothers who were old enough to get in the service right from the beginning of the Second World War. My brother Louis, my oldest brother, Louis, and my next brother, Bernard, both went to England and were stationed at Air Force bases as far as being ground crew people, which was a good thing. There was nobody shooting at you when you were on the ground, like those poor people flying the planes. So my brother Louis, he was a crew chief. That meant he was responsible at all times for the full maintenance of 3 B-17s, bombers. So he had some interesting times on D-Day after his planes had made their missions over across the English Channel and were back home. Somehow or other, one of the pilots said, "Who wants to take another ride?" in a very unofficial fashion. So my brother Louis and a bunch of other ground crew people jumped aboard because they don't normally get to fly. So they actually flew the few miles across the English Channel to see the invasion going on right down below them. And they could see all the troops swarming into the shores of Normandy and just visualize all the terrific battles that are going on right below them. So one of the interesting little sidelights of his situation. Attached to his squadron was also a first lieutenant who was making training films for aerial gunners, and the name of this first lieutenant was Clark Gable, the movie star. So that was a little bit of a special feature for the folks in his squadron. And Louis did say that whatever they said about Clark being a ladies' man was essentially true. So just a little humorous sidelight. Uh, so my other brother, Bernard, his job was, they called him an armorer, and that meant load the plane with the bombs and the bullets. So they had to put all the bombs in the bomb bay and all the big 50 caliber bullets into the machine guns and get the planes ready to go. Bernard was stationed near a city over there, Nottingham, which probably a number of people have heard of as being the fictional home of Robin Hood. So he was actually stationed near the actual city, though, and he mentioned that from time to time he would give some patronage to a pub in Nottingham called the Old Dog and Partridge. So I always remembered that name after all these years of his telling that. Just as a couple of bits of graphic information about what war is really like. They were really in a war, of course. And my brother Louis, he mentioned that of the planes that over the course of the couple of years they were there, that he was responsible for, he had 12 of his planes that never came back from a mission. So that meant there were 120 brave men that just never made it back. And in a similar, very serious note, my other brother, Bernard, mentioned that one day the planes were getting ready to take off, so they were all sitting around with propellers whirring all over the place, and he said one of the ground crew forgot that there were propellers whirring all around and walked right into one. So it was just another occurrence. I always thought that plane didn't take off that day, as you might guess. So it was just a sort of driving home again the point that is so well known and so well publicized, that war is hell. That's the kind of things that could happen. I was very pleased to be in for the time that I was. Just happened to be lucky enough to get in after the big war, and before get out before Korean War. So it's been a pleasure talking to you. I live in Pittsburgh most of my life, but for a number of years we lived right up the road in Long Beach. So when I came out here for a visit with my son, I'm very glad to see that they had this place and I get a chance to record these few thoughts. So it's been my pleasure. Yeah, how do you turn it off?